What's going on, everybody? I wanted to do this a little. I wanted to read this article with you here today because it's absolutely insane to me. The response that pretty much every government around the world, except for like a few, mainly Sweden, had to COVID. And it really pisses me off because the majority of people are not going to be affected by COVID at all. Like, if they get it, they're going to be sick for a little bit, and that's it. The main people who are affected by it, any of this at all, is people who have already been dealt with different problems like diabetes, obesity, things they call comorbidities, which are basically things that like any self-respecting person could know and would be aware of if they just thought for like 5 minutes. And it's funny now because all these commercials are, have you seen these commercials now? They're on like Spotify or whatever. And they're now literally telling people this when this was obvious like 2 or 3 months after this really started. And all that was really needed was a minimum of common sense, which we're going to get into my thoughts on this because it's so simple. The solution was so simple that, like, of course it never happened. Of course it would always be that they chose the worst solutions of all solutions. So
Sweden, which avoided.
we're gonna read a little bit of this article. I'm not gonna go too deep into this, because I want to go into my thoughts on this because it's very simple. The things you could have done. So here we go.
Sweden, once mocked for its COVID strategy, now has one of the lowest COVID mortality rates in Europe. Heading level 1, main landmark.
I don't know if you can understand that, but
Sweden, which avoided strict lockdowns, now has a lower COVID mortality rate than 29 countries in Europe alone. Sounds. Speaking rate, 50%. Thursday, March 24th, 55%. Image credit, Frankie Fualganthan on Wikimedia.com. CC by 4.0. John Mildemore. Heading level, economics. Sweden. Early in the
Leer en español.
Early in the coronavirus pandemic, I asked a simple question. Early in the coronavirus pandemic, I asked a simple question. Link. Could Sweden's laissez-faire approach to the coronavirus actually work? Unlike its European neighbors and virtually all US states, the Swedes had opted to not shut down the economy. The country of 10 million people took what was at first described as a lighter touch. While other countries closed schools and businesses, life in Sweden stayed pretty normal. Kids went to public pools and libraries, while adults sipped wine and had lunch in local bistros. Though mass gatherings were prohibited, children kept going to school. Those students older than 16 were encouraged to attend classes remotely. The Swedish government also encouraged people to work remotely and asked people over 70 to isolate themselves, if possible. For taking this approach, Sweden, and the architect of its public health policies, Anders Tegnell, was widely condemned. Consider just a sampling of headlines. The inside story of how Sweden botched its coronavirus response. Link. Foreign policy. December 22, 2020. Sweden stayed open and more people died of COVID-19, but the real reason may be something darker. Link. Forbes, July 7, 2020. Opening double quotation mark. Sweden's COVID-19 strategy has caused an amplification of the epidemic. Link. France 24, May 17, 2020. Sweden's unconventional approach to COVID-19, what went wrong? Link. Chicago Policy Review, December 14, 2021. Sweden has become the world's cautionary tale. Link. The New York Times, July 7, 2020. These are just a few examples of the avalanche of criticism Sweden received for not locking down its economy like other governments around the world. A quick Google search will turn up dozens more. The other side of the story, heading level 2. I spent a great deal of time in 2020 and 2021 arguing that the media was getting the narrative wrong on Sweden, pointing out that Sweden's response had resulted in exponentially fewer deaths, link, than modelers had predicted and lower mortality overall, link, than most of Europe. The BBC also noted, link, Sweden's economy had not suffered nearly as much as the economies of other European nations, and, more importantly, as other countries were implementing more lockdown measures in 2021, daily COVID deaths in Sweden had reached 0, link. John Milton, enter search terms.
0. What the fuck? So, and I know what I want to get into all of this eventually in a deeper episode, perhaps, because some of this might be distorted and whatnot. But I just wanted to get through that one part because it just kind of illustrates what I'm talking about here. A minimum of common sense was needed, which we didn't get. Of course, the thing about this is that I think there are still places that are locked down. A lot of governments took their cues from China. China took the extreme measure of just like, literally, I was reading stories about people being forced into their homes and like sealed into them, and shit like this. And it's like, this is insane. And this is what they're advocating. This is what they advocated for. And then of course Biden, you had this situation where Biden was trying to mandate the vaccine. Despite the fact that it wasn't, there were cases of people who were like allergic to some parts of it and things like this. And it was voted unconstitutional by judges and things like this. Of course, they still tried to do it anyways, but it is what it is. And so I want to give my thoughts on this because it's actually very simple to be nuanced and middle ground about all of this. But of course, we didn't get any of this at the time, for some weird reason. But like, I think it was after like May or something, I started realizing, like April, May, started realizing that the solution was simple as fuck. And it's so simple that it's a little it's a little ridiculous that they didn't see it. You know what the simple solution was? Here's the simple solution. If you have comorbidities like heart disease, like obesity, like diabetes, if you're not as in shape as like somebody else who's younger, or if you're older, senior citizens, things like this, there are things you can do. Wash your hands, wear a mask if you're out in public and things like this. Some people want to say that masks don't work. I don't really think that even matters to this discussion, to be honest, because people have been doing things that don't work their entire lives, and so it doesn't really make a difference to me if they want to wear a mask or not. Because I did the same thing for different reasons, but and so my basic nuanced suggestion is, if you are one of those people, or if you are planning to hang around with any of those types of people, you do all those things that they tell you to do. Wear the mask, get the vaccine, all this stuff that you're supposed to do without the lockdowns. Honestly, lockdowns were kind of pointless because they didn't slow anything. They didn't slow any spread at all. And if you think about why that would be, it's a very obvious reason. Right? Because a lot of people might have been locked down with their families. You might be in an apartment with 2 or 3 people. And because it's in a kind of enclosed space, it's only a matter of time until that one person might get it for whatever reason. Because it's not like you can stay in your house the entire time and whatnot. You have to go and do things. You have to go and get groceries or whatever at the time. And so it's not like you can't do this. You have to do something, right? For those kinds of incidents, I guess you could go to DoorDash if anything else. But they're also, guilt possible to have this happen, right? And so you come into this situation and you're like, now you have COVID because you were in contact with a person or whatever. What's going to happen when you're in an enclosed area with somebody else? It's going to spread further. because those two people are getting it instead of one person. This kind of thing. Very few people would lock themselves in a room for 14 days, if that's even possible in the first place. It's not realistic, because you would have to give them food in some way, and most doors don't have some way of doing this without opening the door fully, which would basically get you a concentrated blast of COVID. Because it's not like it's just on a mask, right? Like, people are always saying this, like, wear a mask, wear a mask, wear a mask, wear a mask. It's like, yes, that's, a way, but that's not the only way. That's not even the best way, in my opinion. Like, they never really told you to wash your hands. I think Trump, there's some other people who did, but, like, the mask was, like, front and center of this discussion. And I think washing your hands would have been more important in that kind of situation, but it is what it is. Like I said, I'm not really even upset about that fact. It's just like, that's just gonna be a normal thing that happens. People get upset and they overreact. And it's one of the reasons why I try not to as much, because it's like, I see people do this every day and it doesn't help at all. Anyways, so the lockdowns made things worse. It didn't slow any spread at all. It actually made it worse. And we're still dealing with the effects. The expression "good intentions are paved." The path to hell is paved with good intentions. They had good intentions to slow the spread and all this stuff, to do no harm, minimize harm, and it didn't work. It failed. And now our economy's in the shit because they made a huge mistake. Some people made even worse mistakes, like Andrew Cuomo, who literally forced nursing homes to accept COVID patients, which is absolutely insane to me, because those people are at risk for dying from COVID at higher risks than normal people. And that's what he did. It's like, what? That's insane. That's absolutely insane. To me, that's the thing that he did, but that's what he did. At first I didn't believe it. I'm like, this can't be right. This has to be wrong. But nope, he did it. Of course, he's no longer governor, but I don't think Kathy Hochul is any better as far as that goes. For various reasons, but like I said, it's a very easy discussion to have, very nuanced and very common sense. If you're a person who has morbidities, heart disease, cancer, obesity, whatever it is, do all those things. Wear a mask, wash your hands actually would be more important, honestly, but get the vax, things like this. If you're not, and if you're not going to be around those people, I don't think you have anything to worry about. Honestly, at this point, there's still people who are freaked out about COVID. It's like, if you haven't had COVID at this point, you're going to have COVID. That's just the way this is becoming. It's becoming more of like the flu at this day and age than it never was. Like, people were getting so concerned about how, like, COVID was, there was no herd immunity for it and things like this. Turns out that maybe that was true, but it definitely isn't now. There's a lot more herd immunity than there used to be. And this whole thing kind of reminds me of the idea of anti-fragility that Nicholas, I can't pronounce his last name, Taleb or whatever, created the idea of anti-fragility, which is like, basically the idea behind it is, we are not like fragile beings. Like, there's this idea that we're like glass, and if if we fall or whatever, we're gonna shatter, right? In some ways, that's true. We might have injuries or whatever, but those injuries heal and they grow stronger as a result. Those areas grow stronger, things like this, within certain limits, I think, and and so, contrary to what these people were telling, a disease like this, within certain limits, like I'm saying, like if you had certain comorbidities like obesity and things like this, it was not as accurate, but within certain limits, if you get this disease, your immune system now knows the disease. It now knows how to deal with this disease if it comes again. That's anti-fragility. It's now how the immune system works. And so, this is actually a very interesting concept that I find to be very relevant to this very situation we're talking about, because this was precisely the opposite position that the mainstream media had and that all these doctors had and things like this. I think even Fauci at this came to his senses and he started saying this very same thing that I'm talking about. Like if you don't have any of these comorbidities, if you don't have any of these problems, if you're not older, all this stuff, you don't have to worry about any of this. Wear a mask if you're going to deal with people like this, but if you're not,
Stories.
there's
Link
not
back. Enter
really
search.
much need in doing any of this. But that information was very readily available a month or 2 months afterwards. We were becoming very aware of this truth, and one of the things that I think was happening, which kind of made this kind of get obscured, is that there was this conspiracy theory type documentary called Plandemic that made it seem like these comorbidities were basically like, there was this idea that like people were like autopsies were done on these people and whatnot, or no, not autopsies, like they were basically examining these people, and even if they didn't necessarily die from COVID, they were told to say that they died from COVID because they had comorbidities or whatever, things like this. I think a lot of that got a little exaggerated because people were, they were going crazy on both sides. To be honest with you, they had these people like telling all these conspiracies like, oh, 5G is causing this, and it's like, what? But not every area had 5G, things like this. So yeah. Anyways, basic point is, COVID could have been dealt with a minimum of common sense. Sweden being the optimal example of this. So, anyways, hope you enjoyed this episode, and I will talk to you on the next one.